When I raised my glass that night, I wasn't celebrating. I was surviving. Everyone in the room had gone silent, frozen mid-laughter, mid-drink, mid-breath. And there I was, staring at the man I loved, as he shouted, "Yes, Dylan and I slept together. He's better now. Get out." For a second, I didn't even feel the floor beneath me, just this weightless, dizzy quiet. Then I lifted my glass, looked him dead in the eyes, and said softly, "To honesty." The wine burned on my tongue. The room blurred. I turned and I walked out. But let me go back to where it started, before the noise, before the audience, before everything cracked. My name is Nancy Scholes. I'm 28, and I'm an architect. The kind who stays late at the office obsessing over clean lines and quiet symmetry. I like things that make sense. Spaces, blueprints, even emotions if they'd let me. Jack Bearfield was the opposite of all that. He was motion, laughter, light, a PR manager who could charm anyone into believing anything, including me. When we met, it felt like color flooding into a grayscale life. He was magnetic, always talking, always connecting, always being seen. I wasn't used to people like that, but Jack made me feel visible too. He used to say, "You steady me, Nancy. You make the noise stop." I believed him. For the first year it worked. We built a rhythm, his chaos orbiting my calm. But somewhere in between the client dinners, the rooftop cocktails, and the networking events, I started feeling like background music in his story. He'd come home late, smelling like cologne and champagne, telling stories about his team, especially Dylan. "He's hilarious," Jack would say, laughing as he texted back under the table. "Just office banter." I told myself not to be that girlfriend, the paranoid one. I smiled, nodded, said I trusted him. But trust, I've learned, isn't silence. It's a choice you have to keep remaking, and I was starting to hesitate. One night, he came home glowing. "You'll never believe it," he said, flopping on the couch. Dylan jokingly proposed during our pitch today. He laughed, expecting me to laugh too. I did, but inside something twisted. It wasn't the joke, it was the tone. The way he blushed, not embarrassment, but pride. Then came the comparisons. Mark took his girlfriend to Paris for the weekend he'd tease. "You could be a bit more spontaneous, Nancy." I smiled and said, "I'm not competing with your coworkers." He rolled his eyes. "You're too serious sometimes." That's the thing about emotional paper cuts, they don't bleed right away. They just sting later when it's too late to say, "That hurt." When we moved in together, I thought maybe things would settle. We found a small 2-bedroom near the river. It was the first space that truly felt like ours. We spent weekends painting walls, arguing over curtain colors, building IKEA furniture until 2 a.m. The kind of normal that makes you believe in beginnings again. Then Jack suggested a housewarming party. "Let's make it perfect," he said, stringing fairy lights across the balcony. "You'll finally meet everyone from the office." The way he said finally made it sound like an initiation. In the days leading up, our home became his stage. New outfits arrived. His phone buzzed constantly. He curated playlists, lighting menu details like our relationship depended on the right Spotify mix. I joked, "You sure this is about us and not your PR image?" He laughed. "Oh, come on. You'll thank me when everyone's impressed." That word again. Perfect. Perfect apartment. Perfect image. Perfect life. Sometimes I wondered if Jack cared about being happy or just about looking like he was. Still, I helped. I bought new glasses, cleaned every corner, played the supportive partner role. Because when you love someone, you show up even when it feels like you're setting the stage for your own invisibility. The night of the party was stunning, I'll give him that. Soft lights, golden laughter, the smell of wine and citrus candles. Jack moved through the crowd like he owned the air, charming, confident, untouchable. I stayed near the kitchen, refilling drinks, catching fragments of conversations about campaigns and clients. Then he arrived, Dylan. I recognized him instantly from photos, all confidence and smirk, the kind of man who mistakes arrogance for charisma. Jack's voice brightened when he saw him. "Nancy, this is Dylan. Finally you two meet." I shook his hand. His grip was firm, rehearsed. "I've heard about you," I said. "Likewise," he replied, smiling just enough to make it sting. "He talks about you all the time." Jack laughed, that nervous laugh people do when truth brushes too close. I saw one of Jack's friends exchange a look, the kind people give when they sense a crack forming but don't want to get involved. The rest of the night played out like a slow unraveling. Dylan followed Jack everywhere. Their whispers were too quiet, their laughter too synchronized. Every time I passed, Jack would switch tones, plaster on that host smile, and ask if I was okay on drinks. At one point, I pulled him aside near the balcony. "You're being a little obvious," I said quietly. He blinked, that defensive flicker lighting up his eyes. "What's that supposed to mean?" "You know exactly what it means." "Oh, come on," he scoffed. "We're just having fun." "Jack, you're flirting with him in front of everyone." He smirked. "Maybe if you weren't standing in the corner all night, I wouldn't have to." That line hit harder than I expected. I didn't respond, just stepped back and let him walk away, his laughter echoing like applause in a play I hadn't agreed to join. I told myself not to ruin his night. I'd talk to him after the guests left, but the universe decided to move up the schedule. Around midnight, the music got louder, the drinks stronger, the masks thinner. I was in the kitchen when I heard him, his voice sharp and drunk. I walked out, and suddenly all eyes were on me. "You know what your problem is, Nancy," Jack said, standing by the couch, face flushed. "You make everything so boring. You drain the room." The laughter died. Someone muttered, "Jack, stop." I stayed still. "You've had too much to drink. Maybe we should—" "Oh, don't patronize me." He took a step closer. "You think being quiet makes you better? That's not love, Nancy. That's control." Control. The word hung there, sharp and absurd. He laughed, but it cracked halfway. "You always want everything perfect, predictable. I can't breathe around that." The room froze. "Jack," I said softly, "this isn't the place." He grinned that manic, reckless grin and lifted his glass. "Why not? Everyone already knows." And then it happened. He looked at me like a man possessed, raised his drink and shouted, "Yes, Dylan and I slept together. He's better now. Get out." The words crashed through the air like glass. Dylan's face went white. Someone gasped. Someone else whispered my name. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I picked up my wine, raised it slightly, and whispered, "To honesty." The liquid trembled in the glass. I set it down and walked out. Behind me, I heard someone mutter, "Jesus, Jack," and his voice breaking. She needed to hear it. But I didn't turn around, because when someone shows you who they are under the lights, you don't stay for the encore. The night didn't end when I left the party. It just went quiet, the kind of quiet that feels alive, humming, vibrating with everything unsaid. I walked without direction, heels clicking against the pavement, city lights bleeding into the fog. I didn't even notice I'd been crying until the wind turned cold against my face. I checked into a small hotel near the river, the first one with a vacancy sign still lit. The receptionist looked at me too long, mascara-streaked red wine stain on my dress, but said nothing. I was grateful for that. In the room, I sat on the edge of the bed and stared at the wall. Beige wallpaper, humming air conditioner, nothing else. I tried to replay what had happened, but my mind wouldn't give me sentences, only flashes. His voice, the laughter, the stunned silence, the look on Dylan's face when he realized Jack wasn't joking. I thought about texting him just why, but my hands wouldn't move. I wasn't even angry yet, just hollow, like someone had scraped everything out of me and left the shell standing. I opened my phone. 17 missed calls, 5 voicemails, 3 from Jack, 2 from people I barely knew from his office. One of them said, "Nancy, I'm so sorry, he's just drunk." Another said, "Don't let this ruin your career. Okay." As if humiliation were a stain you could bleach out. Jack's first text came 5 minutes after I'd left. "Nancy, please come back. I didn't mean it. Nancy, can we talk? You misunderstood." Nancy, I was drunk. It wasn't what it sounded like. But it was. People don't confess what isn't already true. I turned the phone face down and stared at the ceiling. There was this strange heaviness pressing on my chest. Not heartbreak, not rage, something quieter. A kind of death you don't scream about because you know the body's still warm. That's how betrayal feels when it's public. It isn't just one wound, it's everyone watching you bleed. At some point, I must have fallen asleep because I woke up to sunlight cutting across the bed. My phone was still vibrating. Messages stacked on messages. I deleted them all. Then I sat there for a long time, bare feet against the carpet, hands trembling around a cup of instant coffee. I remember thinking how absurd it was how the world just kept moving. Taxis honking, people jogging, someone laughing outside. Didn't they know a universe had collapsed? When I finally looked at myself in the mirror, I almost didn't recognize the woman staring back. Eyes swollen, lipstick smudged, hair tangled. But underneath the ruin, I saw something else, a strange stillness. I whispered to my reflection, "You're done. That morning, I went to work like nothing happened. My body went through motions my mind hadn't caught up with, yet coffee sketching client calls. No one knew. No one asked. It was safer that way. By evening, I texted my best friend Hannah and asked if I could stay at her place for a while. She didn't ask why. She'd been there, she knew silence like this. When I arrived, she just hugged me and said, "He doesn't get to define you by the worst thing he did." I nodded, though I didn't believe her yet. That night, she made tea, and I sat at her kitchen table staring at the steam curling from the cup. My phone buzzed again. I didn't look. I knew it was him. The apologies had started turning into accusations. "You embarrassed me first. You made me feel small. We were already over Nancy." There it was. The spin. The narrative shift. The PR man back in control. I scrolled once more before blocking him. The last message said, "I just wanted us to be happy." I almost laughed. Happy. The word felt foreign in my mouth. For days, I drifted through time without order. Hannah would talk, and I'd hear the words, but not the meaning. My body functioned, but my mind was somewhere between the echo of that party and the hum of the hotel air conditioner. One evening, I caught myself standing in front of the closet, staring at the red dress I'd worn that night. I'd packed it without thinking. It hung limp, smelling faintly of perfume and wine. That dress used to make me feel beautiful, confident. It was the one he'd called a showstopper. Now it looked like evidence. I folded it carefully, put it in a paper bag, and took it down to the dumpster. I didn't even throw it in. I placed it on top gently like a body I was letting go of. Like a body When I came back upstairs, Hannah was waiting in the doorway. "You okay?" I nodded. "Just cleaning." But it wasn't cleaning, it was exorcism. That night, I dreamed of him standing on that balcony laughing, as if the whole thing was a scene he'd directed. When I woke, I realized something important. Jack didn't destroy me because I was weak. He destroyed me because I kept giving him the spotlight. Every time I forgave, every time I stayed quiet, I built him a stage. The next morning, I packed my things, got my own apartment, and changed my number. I didn't leave a forwarding address. There were still moments, of course, brushing my teeth and noticing only one toothbrush, hearing a song we'd once danced to, catching myself setting out 2 cups of coffee instead of 1. But slowly the silence became softer, less like emptiness, more like peace. I used to think love meant understanding patience, loyalty, no matter what. But real love, the kind that lasts, doesn't humiliate you to feel alive. It doesn't make you small to make itself large. He called what I gave him control, but it wasn't that. It was care, and he mistook it for weakness. Now, when I think about that night, I don't see him anymore. I see me walking out, holding my glass steady while the world fell apart. I didn't lose that night. I left. A few weeks later, the silence I'd chosen turned into noise I didn't ask for. Rumors have a way of crawling out from the cracks of other people's guilt. Jack didn't just cheat, he rebranded it. The first time I saw it was on social media. One of his coworkers had posted a picture from that night. The caption read, "Sometimes you outgrow people who hold you back. Growth hurts, but it's worth it." There he was in the photo smiling beside Dylan. My name wasn't mentioned, but it didn't have to be. Everyone who knew us would understand. By the end of the week, I'd heard the same story 3 different ways. Nancy was emotionally distant. Nancy was controlling. Nancy didn't let him be himself. I remember sitting on my couch, reading the comments, heart pounding. Not because I believed them, but because other people did. People who'd never met me. People who'd laughed at our photos once and now whispered about how I'd driven him away. Jack was good at this. He'd always been good at controlling the narrative that was his job after all. He could turn any situation into a polished headline. And now I was the bad PR, the ex to be rebranded. Hannah noticed before I did. She came home one night holding her phone jaw tight. "He's posting about healing," she said, "about finding peace after a toxic relationship." "Let him," I said quietly. "It's all he knows how to do, sell an image." Still, she said, "It's cruel." Cruel didn't even cover it. It was surgical. Precise. He'd always said I was the stable one, the calm one. Now he was weaponizing that calm, twisting it into coldness, painting me as the woman who never felt enough, never cared enough, never let him breathe. And the worst part, the world loves a man's redemption arc more than a woman's truth. I could have posted screenshots. I could have told the real story, how he'd humiliated me, lied to me, broken something in me that still hadn't healed. But what would that make me? Another bitter ex feeding the gossip cycle. No, I refused to give him that. Instead, I disappeared. Deleted my social media. Ignored the whispers. Let him talk. Because I knew time had a way of peeling back the polish. Still, it hurt the quiet kind of hurt that doesn't scream. It just sits behind your ribs, heavy and constant. Sometimes I'd walk by the cafe near his old office. I'd see familiar faces from his PR circle inside, laughing, checking their phones, pretending not to see me. I'd catch fragments of conversation through the window. My name, his name, laughter that used to include me. Once I heard someone say, she was always kind of uptight. He deserves someone more fun. That sentence followed me home like a ghost. I poured a glass of wine, sat by the window, and whispered it out loud, uptight. The word felt smaller than me, like they'd shrunk my entire being into one adjective. Hannah found me like that later, staring out into the city. "Why do you read that stuff?" she asked gently. "I don't know," I said. "It's like touching a bruise. You know it'll hurt, but you do it anyway just to make sure you're still alive." She sat beside me in silence. We watched the streetlights blink on one by one. Then she said, "He's rewriting the story. But one day he'll forget his own version. They always do." She was right. People like Jack can't keep their masks straight forever. But in that moment, it didn't feel like victory. It felt like erasure. A few days later, I ran into a mutual acquaintance, a man from one of Jack's work parties. He smiled too politely the way people do when they already know something about you. "Nancy." "Hey," he said. "You look good. I heard you and Jack, you know." "Yeah," I replied. He hesitated. "It's just he said you weren't happy, that you were planning to leave anyway." I almost laughed. The absurdity of it. He wasn't just rewriting me, he was editing me out entirely. I wanted to scream to correct him, to say, "Actually, he cheated on me in front of 30 people. But I didn't. Because truth screamed sounds like denial. And denial is exactly what he wanted to paint me with. So I smiled instead. If that's what he said, then I guess that's what happened. He nodded awkwardly and changed the subject. When I got home, I sat down with my sketchbook, something I hadn't touched in weeks. My pencil hovered over the page, unsure where to begin. But then I drew a line, just one clean, deliberate stroke. That's what I loved about architecture, the honesty of lines. They don't lie. They don't perform. They just exist. I drew for hours. My hands moved faster than my thoughts. Walls, windows, beams, angles, structure after structure. Something inside me started to steady. At some point, Hannah came by, leaning against the doorway. "Looks like you're back." Maybe I said eyes on the page. Or maybe I just needed something that makes sense again. She smiled. "You always make sense. He's the one who can't live without a script." That night, I looked at my reflection. Again this time, not as the woman he humiliated, but as someone who'd survived it. My eyes still looked tired, yes, but beneath that there was a flicker of something sharper. Not revenge, not bitterness, clarity. I realized then that Jack wasn't the kind of man who lies to people. He lies for them to maintain their image of him, to stay the hero in every version. And for a while I had helped him. Every quiet nod, every forgiving smile, every time I told myself he didn't mean it. I'd been part of his PR team without even realizing it. No more. I wasn't going to be his redemption arc. That night I opened my old laptop and started applying for a new job somewhere far from the firm we both used to know. Somewhere no one cared about who cheated on whom, only about blueprints and deadlines. When I closed the screen, the room was quiet again, but this time it wasn't heavy. It was mine. 6 months later, I'd almost forgotten what Jack's voice sounded like. Not completely echoes lingered, the way certain songs stay stuck in your head, but it had faded into background noise. I'd moved into my own apartment by then, small and minimal, with white walls and wide windows that caught the morning light. Silence finally sounded like peace instead of punishment. I didn't think about him much anymore. Until one Friday evening, Hannah came over, holding her phone like it contained a secret she couldn't wait to spill. "You're not going to believe this," she said, dropping onto my couch. "What Jack got fired." I blinked. "From the agency." She nodded, scrolling. Apparently he took credit for a coworker's campaign pitch. Dylan's, actually. For a moment, I just stared at her. "You're kidding." "Nope. It's all over their LinkedIn. His name's gone. People are talking." I leaned back, exhaling slowly. I didn't feel the rush of satisfaction I thought I would. Just this stillness. The quiet understanding that what falls apart on its own doesn't need your push. "I guess Karma finally sent the invoice," Hannah said. I smiled faintly. "Yeah, and she doesn't accept installments." Later that night, I went online out of curiosity, not to stalk, just to see. His Instagram looked different. half the photos gone. The captions that once screamed #hustle, #success, #grind had vanished. His follower count had dropped, and the ones who used to comment hearts and fire emojis, silent. That's how PR collapses, not in scandal, but in the absence of applause. Scrolling further, I saw that Dylan had removed him from his tagged photos. Their friendship had clearly dissolved after the fallout. Apparently, Dylan had come clean to their boss about the stolen pitch. The same Dylan he'd humiliated me for. It's funny, the world has a way of circling back, slowly, quietly. I closed the app and sat on the floor of my living room, the city lights spilling across the hardwood. My reflection in the window looked calm, not triumphant, not vengeful, just free. I poured a glass of wine, took a sip, and whispered, "To erosion," because that's what karma really is. Not an explosion, not fire raining from the sky, but erosion. A slow wearing down of what's built on lies until there's nothing left to stand on. That weekend, I met an old colleague for coffee. She'd heard the rumors, too. He always had a way of stepping on people, she said. I'm not surprised. Neither am I replied. He spent too long pretending the floor was a mirror. After that conversation, I walked by our old apartment, the one near the river. The curtains were drawn, balcony plants, dead fairy lights, tangled and dusty. The building looked smaller than I remembered, like grief had shrunk it. I didn't stop, I just kept walking. That night, I finally unpacked the last box I'd avoided since moving in. Inside was a photo frame face down at the bottom, the two of us smiling at some event, him in a gray suit, me in that red dress. The image looked like two strangers posing as lovers. I slid the photo out, tore it once, and dropped it in the bin. No rage, no tears, just the soft rip of paper and the release of what no longer needed to exist. Hannah texted me later. "Feels good, doesn't it?" I replied. "It doesn't feel at all. And maybe that's the good part. Because there's a kind of peace that comes not from forgiveness, but from indifference when someone's story no longer needs an ending in yours." A week later, I got an email from my firm offering a position on a new project, a modern community library in the countryside. It wasn't glamorous, but it was mine. A chance to build something from the ground up where structure meant stability, not performance. The first day on site, I stood among the raw, concrete walls, the smell of rain in the air, and thought, this is what real rebuilding looks like. Not online apologies, not grand gestures, just steady work, quiet days, and foundations that don't lie. At night, I'd come home, shower, off the dust light, a candle, and sit by the window sketching until my eyelids grew heavy. The world outside kept turning headlines, gossip, PR campaigns, but none of it touched me anymore. I hadn't won anything. I'd simply stopped playing. Sometimes Hannah would ask, "Do you ever wonder if he regrets it?" I'd shrug, maybe, but that's between him and the mirror. Because I'd learned something no one teaches you about closure. You don't have to watch your enemy fall. Sometimes it's enough just to know you're not under them anymore. One night before bed, I stood in front of my window again. Same glass, same skyline, and whispered the line that had followed me for months. Karma doesn't knock, it leaks. And tonight I could finally see the puddle forming. It had been nearly a year since that night. Long enough that people stopped asking, stopped whispering, stopped remembering. But on a random Thursday afternoon, while I was finalizing drawings for the library project, an old name appeared in my inbox. From Jack Bearfield. Subject, can we please talk? For a long time, I just stared at it. The words didn't even sting. They just looked strange out of place, like a ghost trying to send mail. I clicked it open. Nancy, I know I don't deserve your time, but I've been thinking about you lately, about everything. What I said that night was cruel. I was trying to hurt you because I hated how small I felt. You were always good to me, and I took advantage of that. I've been in therapy. I'm learning about my patterns, my ego, how I destroy the things I love. You didn't deserve that. I hope you're doing well. I just needed to tell you I'm sorry, truly. I read it once, then again, then a third time slower. It wasn't the words that caught me, it was the tone. He still wrote like a man addressing an audience, like the apology was a press release. The structure was perfect, the self-awareness neatly packaged. I almost smiled. He'd learned the language of remorse, not the feeling of it. But what surprised me wasn't the apology. It was how little space it took up inside me. A year ago, that message would have cracked me open. Now it just landed and sank without a ripple. I closed the laptop and leaned back in my chair. The library sketches were spread across the desk. Clean lines, open light foundations that made sense. That was the difference between then and now. My world finally had structure again. Still, I couldn't help replaying a few fragments his laughter that night, his face when he realized what he'd said. For so long, those memories had been knives. Now they were just echoes dull and far away. I opened my journal and wrote without thinking, "Closure isn't a conversation. It's a choice you stop needing to make." I sat with that for a while, watching the ink dry. That evening, Hannah stopped by with takeout. I told her about the email. She raised an eyebrow. "You're not actually going to reply, are you?" "Good. He doesn't get to narrate your piece. I just didn't expect to feel nothing." "That's not nothing," she said. "That's healing." We ate in silence for a bit, the clinking of chopsticks filling the room. Then she asked, "Do you ever miss him?" I thought about it, really thought. The way he used to talk with his hands, the way he'd hum while shaving. The nights we'd stay up planning futures that now felt imaginary. "I miss the person I thought he was," I said finally. "But not the person he turned out to be." Hannah nodded. "That's fair. You can grieve a ghost without wanting it back." Later that night, after she left, I sat by the window again. The city outside shimmered with quiet life couples, walking buses passing a faint siren in the distance. Normal things, beautiful in their ordinariness. I opened my laptop again and hovered over the reply button. My fingers rested on the keys. For a second, I imagined what I could say. "Thank you. I forgive you. I hope you find peace." But none of it felt right. Because forgiveness wasn't about him anymore. It was about the space he no longer occupied. Instead, I closed the email, archived it, and opened my sketches again. A new concept had been forming in my mind all week, a reading atrium open to sunlight where people could sit in silence surrounded by stories. I smiled at the irony. As I traced the lines, I realized something simple but profound. Silence wasn't emptiness. It was design. It was intentional. It meant choosing what stayed and what didn't. That night, I poured a small glass of wine and stepped onto the balcony. The air smelled like rain. I raised the glass, just like I had the night everything fell apart, but this time the toast wasn't bitter. To lessons I whispered, and to never repeating them. A part of me knew he'd probably wait for a reply. Maybe he'd check his inbox every day for a while. Maybe he'd tell himself he'd done the right thing, said the right words, earned forgiveness. But none of that had anything to do with me. He could perform his redemption for someone else. My silence wasn't rejection. It was reclamation. The stars blinked faintly above the skyline, scattered but steady. I took another sip, breathing in the stillness. For the first time since that night, I didn't feel like a victim or a survivor. I just felt like myself. A few months later, life found its rhythm again, steady, deliberate, quiet. The library project was nearing completion. Most days I woke to sunlight pooling across the floor, made coffee, and drove to the site where the smell of sawdust and new beginnings hung in the air. My hands had purpose again. My heart had balance. And then one morning the universe decided to test that peace. I was on my way to a cafe before work, the same one I'd avoided for almost a year, because it was close to Jack's old office. The rain had just stopped, streets still glistening the sky, soft and gray. I pushed open the door, ordered my drink, and turned, and there he was, sitting outside at one of the corner tables, head bent over a cup of black coffee, face thinner, eyes dimmer. His suit looked worn, his posture smaller somehow. The air around him didn't carry the same confidence. It sagged with something heavier consequence. For a second I froze. My mind didn't spiral, didn't race, just paused. He looked up. Our eyes met. Recognition flickered. Then something else, guilt maybe, or the ghost of what used to be. He tried to smile. It didn't reach his eyes. I didn't smile back. I just nodded once, calm, polite, final. Then I walked past him, collected my coffee, and left. My heart didn't pound. My hands didn't shake. All I felt was clarity's sharp, clean light. For months, I'd imagined that moment, what I'd say if I ever saw him again. I'd rehearsed apologies. I'd never get explanations that would never matter. But standing there, I realized I didn't need any of it. The silence between us said everything words never could. He used to mock my quiet, called it cold and boring. He never understood that silence isn't the absence of power, it's the refinement of it. As I walked away, I heard the faint sound of his chair scraping the ground. Maybe he wanted to follow to talk, but he didn't. Because he knew in that one look that the version of me he broke no longer existed. I turned the corner, sunlight spilling across the wet pavement, and exhaled a breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding for a year. That night back home, I poured myself a glass of wine and stood by the window again. My ritual, my quiet defiance. The skyline shimmered steady and indifferent. I thought about everything I'd learned in the space his absence left behind. Love isn't proof you give someone, it's peace you build with them. And when someone mistakes your calm for control, your loyalty for weakness, you don't fix it. You walk away before they teach you to shrink. I raised my glass not to revenge, not to closure, but to understanding. Funny, I murmured. He once said silence scared him. Turns out it became my greatest weapon. I thought back to that party, the fairy lights, the red dress, the sharp sting of betrayal that once defined me. Now the memory felt distant, like a photograph I'd long stopped looking at. He performed love. I learned peace. The two are never the same. I turned off the lights, letting the city glow paint soft patterns across the floor. Tomorrow I'd be back at the construction site, sleeves rolled up, blueprints in hand, building something solid, something real. Not perfect, just honest. And for the first time since that night, I felt weightless. Because letting go wasn't losing. It was winning quietly.